melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokach haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asali kol tzarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten layev koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavir shinam yanai mamei avapai. Utnenu hayom ubechol yom lechenu u'chesed rachamim be'einecha u'bnei choreinu v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chasadim tovim le'amo Yisrael. Yehi ratzon milfanechem. Bon kol ha'olamim. Kol anachnu kol b'nei beitecha. Ashreinu ma tov chalkenu ma naim goralenu ma yafa yerushatenu. Ashreinu shenachnu mashkimim uma arivim erev v'voker v'omim pamayim b'chol yom. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai echad. Kadesh et shimcha al makdishe shemecha v'kadesh et shimcha ba'olamecha u'vishuatcha tarim v'tagbiach karnenu baruch atah Adonai mekadesh et shimcha barabim.
Service continues on page 81.
Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit leDavid. Asachta mispri l'macholi, hitachta sakit b'tazveni simcha, v'ma'an yizamercha k'vod v'le'yudom, anai Elohai le'olam odeka.
Mourner's Kaddish, page 82. For those who are reciting, please recite along with me. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei rabba, v'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayedecho beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam v'lo me'al maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei kudesha. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imbru. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imbru. Aseh shalom b'mromav huya aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imbru. We rise on page 83 for Baruch Shema.
Baruch Shamar v'haya olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reshit, Baruch omer v'oseh, Baruch gozer u'mekayem, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch mishalem zachar tov v'yireyav, Baruch chala'ad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch podeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Yachid Chei Ha'olamim, Melech Meshubach M'Torah Adei Ad Shemo Hagadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal Batishbachot. Odu L'Adonai Kiru Vishmo. Kol Elohei ha'amim elilim v'Adonai shamayim asa hod v'hadar lefanav oz v'chadva bimkomo. Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael min ha'olam v'ad ha'olam v'yaruch kol ha'am amen v'halel Adonai v'amamu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu l'hadam laglav kadoshu v'amamu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu l'har kadsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu v'hu achim yiraper von v'lo yashchid v'hirba l'shiv tov l'yukol hamato. Onai tzvot ashrei adam boteach bach, onai hoshia hamelech yanenu v'yom karenu, hoshia adam mecha urach et nachalatecha. ואני וחסדך פתחתי יגל ליבי בשורתך אשר על אדוני כי עמל עלי, המנצח מזמור לדוד. יהי רצון אמרי פי והגאון ליבי לפניך אדוני צורי וגואלי. הודה אדוני נפש עבדיו ולא ישבו כל החוסים בו, תפילה למשה איש האלוהים. יהי נועם אדוני אלוהינו עלינו, מעשה ידינו קונה עלינו, מעשה ידינו קוננהו, יושב בסתר עליון בצל שדי יתלונן. יקראנו בעיניהו עמו אנוכי בצרה אחרצהו ואכבדהו, אורך ימים אספיהו והריהו בישועתי, אורך ימים אספיהו והריהו בישועתי. הללויה, הללו את שם אדוני, הללו עבדי אדוני. Beit Yisrael Baruchu et Adonai, Beit Aharon Baruchu et Adonai, Beit Halevi Baruchu et Adonai, Yirei Adonai Baruchu et Adonai, Baruch Adonai Tzion Shochem Yerushalayim, Hallelujah.
Please rise.
Page 92.
Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Elohe ha'Elohim, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Adonai ha'Adonim, ki le'olam chasto. Le'osa nifla'ot gedolot levado, ki le'olam chasto. Le'ose hashamayim b'tfuna, ki le'olam chasto. Le'roka ha'aretz al hamayim, ki le'olam chasto. Le'ose orim gedolim, ki le'olam chasto. Et Hashem eshlam emshelet bayom, ki le'olam chasto. Et hayareach ha'chochavim l'meshelet balayla, ki le'olam chasto. V'makeh Mitzrayim b'ivchorehem, ki le'olam chasto. V'yotze Yisrael mitocham, ki le'olam chasto. B'yad chazaka u'b'zroa netuya, ki le'olam chasto. V'gozer yam suf ligzarim, ki le'olam chasto. V'he'evir Yisrael b'tocho, ki le'olam chasto. V'niyeh paro v'chelo v'yam suf, ki le'olam chasto. V'molich amo b'midbar, ki le'olam chasto. V'makeh melachim gedolim, ki le'olam chasto. V'yaharog melachim adirim, ki le'olam chasto. V'sichon melech ha'emori, ki le'olam chasto. U'le'og melech ha'bashan, ki le'olam chasto. V'natan artzam le'nachala, ki le'olam chasto. Nachal Yisrael avdo, ki le'olam chasto. Sheb shifr le'nu zachor lanu, ki le'olam chasto. Vayifrakenu mitzarenu, ki le'olam chasto. Noten lechem lechol basar, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu le'el hashamayim, ki le'olam chasto.
You may be seated.
Vanu tzadikim b'nai l'sharim nava tehila. Nafshenu chikta l'Adonai ezvenu maginenu, ki vo yismach libenu, ki v'shem kacho v'tachnu, yihi chasdecha Adonai aleinu kasher yichanu la, mizmor shir leyom hashabbat. Tzadik katamar yifrach ke'eraz balvanon yiske shetulim bevet Adonai b'chatzor Eloheinu yafrichu od yanuvun b'sevad Hashem v'ranim yihu lehakid ki yesh Adonai tzuri v'lo avlata bo Adonai malach geru lavesh Mikolot mayim rabim adirim mishparei yam adir b'marom Adonai edotecha nemnu me'od levetcha nava kodesh Adonai L'orach Yamim, Yehi Chavod Adonai L'olam, Yismach Adonai B'ma'asav. V'hu echom yichaper avon v'lo eshchit, v'hir balach shiva povlio kol chamato, Adonai Hoshiach al kinenu v'yom karenu.
Ashrei begins at the top of page 96.
Ashrei Oshvei Beitecha Od Yehalu Chatzela, Ashrei Ha'am Shekachalo, Ashrei Ha'am Shadnai Elohav. Tehillat Hanai Yadaber Pi V'Rech Kol Basar Shem Kachol Le'olam Va'ed, V'anachnu V'Arach Yat Me'at Havei Olam, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hali Nafshi Ad Adonai. Adonai Shomer Et Gerim, Yatom Almana Yoded V'Derech V'Shayim Yevayed, Imloch Hanai Le'olam, Elohai Tzion L'Dor V'Dor, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Ki Tov Zama Eloheinu, Ki Na'im Nava Tehillah. Magid Rav Yaakov Chukav Mishpatav Yisrael Lo Asachen L'Chol Goy Mishpatim Bal Yadaum Hallelujah 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 Adonai Min Hashamayim Hallelu B'Amromim. Vayarem Keren Le'amoti L'Chol Chatzidav Livnei Yisrael Am Karovo Hallelujah Hallelujah Shir L'Adonai Shir Chadash. Asor Malchehem Bizikim Fnich B'Dehem B'Chavle Varzel La'asot B'Hem Mishpat Katub Hadarhu L'Chol Chatzidav Hallelujah Hallelujah Halu El B'Kadsho Haluhu Birkia Uzo Haluhu B'Tzilt Shama Haluhu B'Tzilt Trua Kol Hanshama Hallelujah Hallelujah Kol Hanshama Hallelujah Hallelujah Baruch Hanai Le'olam Amen Ve'Amen. Baruch Hanai Elohim Elohei Yisrael Oseni Fo Levado Baruch Shem Kevodo Le'olam V'Imlei Kevodo Et Kol Haaretz Amen Ve'Amen.
Please rise.
Vayevarech David Adonai Lenei Kol HaKahal Vayomer David. Atahu Adonai HaElohim Asher Bacharto B'Avram Hotzeto Me'ur Kastim V'Samto Shemo Avraham Matzata Et Levavo Na'aman Lefanecha. V'hayam Bakata Lifnehem Ve'eru B'toch Hayam B'Yabasha V'et Rodfehem Hishlachta V'Minsolot K'mo Even B'Mayim Azim. Vayar Yisrael et hayad hagadola asher asa Adonai b'Mitzrayim v'yiru ha'am et Adonai v'aminu b'Adonai v'Moshe avdo az yashir Moshe unei Yisrael. Mi chamocha ba'im Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, ki l'Adonai hamlucha u'moshel b'goyim, va'alu moshim b'hartzion lishpot et ha'aresav, v'haita l'Adonai hamlucha v'haya Adonai l'melech kol ha'aretz, v'yom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad.
You may be seated, top of page 104.
Nishmat kol chai tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. Mi melach mi yishvelach mi ya'avach lach. Ha'el hagadol hagibor v'hanara el elyon koner shemayim va'aretz nahalelcha unshabecha unfa'ercha unvarechet shem kadshecha ka'amur leDavid barchti nafshi et Adonai v'chol kravai et shem kadsho. Ha'el b'tal tumot v'zecha hagadol b'kvod shemecha hagibor lanatzach v'hanara b'noratecha hamelach hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa.
Yishar koach. The service continues with Shochan Ad, middle of 105.
Ochenad Maharam v'kadosh shemo. If Yisharim tithalal uvdivrei tzadikim titbarach uvilshon chasidim titramam uvekerev kedoshim titkadash uvmakavot revivot damecha v'et Yisrael. Shekain kovat kol hayitzurim lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elahei avotenu lehodot l'halel l'shabech l'faer l'ramim l'hader l'varech le'aleu l'kales al kol divrei shirat v'tishbechot David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha yishtabach shimcha lo'ad malkeinu. Rachot v'hodot me'atavi ad olam baruch Adonai el melech gadol batishbachot el hahodot adon haniflot habocher b'shirei zimra melech helchei haolamim yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah ve'alma divrach yirutevem lich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedecha beit Yisrael Ba'agala uvizman kariv emru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevorach leolam oyom maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalash medekudeshah b'rechu le'elamin kol birchata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechamata da'amiran ve'oma v'emru amen. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed.
You may be seated.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvorech hoshech oseh shalom uvoreh et hakol. Ein ke'er kechadonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh v'yein zulat chamalkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes biltecha go aleinu limot hamashiach v'yein domeh l'chamashiachenu l'tchiyat hametim. El Adon al kol hamasim v'haruchum v'harach b'fi kol nishama gadlo v'tuvo mahalei olam dahat utvuna sovevimoto hamid gael chayot hakodesh v'nedar b'chavod hamerkava zechut umishor lifnei chiso Chesed v'rachamim lifnei chevodo, tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu yitzaharam b'dah b'vina ufaskel koach ugvura natan bahem liyot moshlim b'kerev tevel meleim ziv umfikim noga na'ezivam b'chol ha'olam semechim b'tzeitam v'sasim b'voam Osim be'em aritzon konam, Pierre v'chavod notnim lishma, Sahala v'rina lezecher malchuto, Kara l'shemesh v'yizrachor, Ra v'hit kin tzurat havana, Shevach notnim lo, Kol tzeva marom, Tiferet ugedula serafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh la'el asher shavat b'kol masim. Baruch Surena Malkeinu v'Go Aleinu. Kulam ahavim, kulam berurim, kulam giborim, v'kulam osim behem ahav yiraretzon konam, v'kulam potchim et pihem b'kedusha v'tahara, b'shira v'zimra, v'varchim u'mshabachim, u'mfarim u'maritzim, u'makdishim u'mamlichim, et shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol. V'kulam mekablim aleihem al malchut shamayim zeh mizeh, V'notnim reshut zeh lazeh lahakdish liotram b'nachat ruach v'safa v'rura u'v'nima kedosha kulam ki'achadonim v'yomrim be'yira kadosh 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 Adonai tzvaot meloch haaretz kevodo v'hofanim v'chayot hakodesh v'rash gadol mitnasim liumat serafim Liumatam mishabchim ve'omrim Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkechu lanu meheira le'oroho Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot. Havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz v'tolichenu kama meyut le'artzenu ki el poel yeshuot ata uvana v'charta mikolam v'lashon v'keraftanu l'shimcha hagadol sela be'emet l'hodot l'chal yachedcha b'yahavaha Baruch atah Adonai habocherem al Yisrael b'yahavaha Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai Elohechem Emet. L'dor vador hu kayam u'shmo kayam v'chiso nachon u'malchuto v'emunato l'ad kayameh. Emet shatahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu Malkeinu melech avotenu go'aleinu go'el avotenu yotzreinu tzur yeshuatenu hodenu matzilenu me'olam shemecha ein Elohim zulatecha ezrat avotenu atahu me'olam. Tehillat Elyon Baruch Hu Vorach Moshe Bnei Israel Chanuhu Shiraha B'Simcha Rabba V'Amruhu Chulam Mi Chamocha Bo'elim Adonai Mi Kamocha Nedar B'Kodesh Nahora Tehillah Osef Ele Shira Chadasha Shibchu Geulim L'Shimcha Safat Hayam Yachad kulam hodu v'himlichu v'amru Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Sur Yisrael Kuma v'ezrat Yisrael Uftechinu mecha Yehuda v'Yisrael Go aleinu Adonai tzvot Shema Kedosh Yisrael Baruch.
For those still davening, please continue as the rest of us are on 115B for the repetition.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר פוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מחמוך בעל גבורו ומדומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. יקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר. קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך הארץ כבודו. אז בקול רעש גדול אדיר וחזק משמיעים קול, מתנשאים לעומת שרפים לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ממקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון. תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך, לדור ודור לנצח נצחים. בעינינו תירנה תירנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. בעינינו תירנה תירנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. על ידי דוד משיח צדקך. ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. בשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. ישמח משה במתנת חלקו, כי עבד נאמן קראת לו. כליל תפארת בראשו נתת, בעמדו לפניך על הר סיני. ושני לוחות אבנים הוריד בידו, וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת, וכן כתוב בתורתך. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. ולא נתתו אדוני אלוהינו לגויי הארצות, ולא הנחתו מלכנו לעבדי פסילים, וגם במנוחתו לא יזקנו ערלים. כי לישראל עמך נתתו באהבה, לזרע יעקב אשר בם בחרת. עם מקדשי שביעי כולם יספו ויתענגו מטובך, והשביעי רצית בו וקידשת. חמדת ימים אותו קראת, זכר למעשה וראשית. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו רצה במנוחתנו, קודשנו במצוותיך ותנחקנו בתורתך. סבנו מטבעך ושמחנו בישועתך, וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת. והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך, Ve'anuchu v'Yisrael mekadshei shemecha baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'amcha Yisrael v'tfilatam v'hashevet havodah lidvir beitecha utfilatam be'ahava tekabel b'ratzon utehi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha v'techazenu einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion b'rachamim baruch atah Adonai Hamachazir shechinato l'tzion modim anachnu la. Hatov kilo chalurachamecha v'hamrachem kilo tamu chasadecha me'olam ki v'hinu lach v'yakulam yitbarach v'yitramam shemkama kena tamid le'olam va'ed v'chol hachayim yodu chasela v'halalu et shemcha be'emet hayo yeshuatenu v'ezratenu sela baruch atah Adonai hatov shemecha l'chana elehodot Eloheinu v'Elohavoteinu barchenu b'bracha hamshuleshet b'Torah haktuva al yedei Moshe avdecha ha'amura mipi Aharon uvanav kohanim am kedoshecha kamor yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom Sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam sim shalom tova uvracha chen v'chesed rachamim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael amecha barchenu avinu kulanu k'yeh bior panecha Sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam sim shalom tova uvracha ki ve'orpanecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu Torat chayim ve'ahavat chesed tzedakah uvracha v'rachamim v'chaim v'shalom sim shalom tova uvracha ba'olam sim shalom tova uvracha v'tov ve'enecha levarech et amecha Yisrael v'chol eit uv'chol shah b'shlomecha baruch atah Adonai hamvorech et amo Yisrael b'shalom Yitkadav yitkadash shemei rabah ve'amad yivrach yirtei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'vyamechon v'chayedecha beit Yisrael ba'agala u'bizman kariv ve'imru amen Yehei shmei rabah mevorach li'olam u'yomei omaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalash shmei dekudesha v'richu Le'ela min kaver chata v'shirata tishbachata v'nechamata da'amiran ve'ama ve'imru amen Kid kabas l'hon v'uthon d'chol Yisrael kodam avahon d'vishamaya ve'yimiru amen Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen Oseh shalom v'imrumav huyaseh shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimru. Amen.
Turn back to page 72 for the psalm for the day.
Hayom Yom Shabbat Kodesh. Sadikatamar Yifrach Ke'eres bavanon yiske shetuli beveit Adonai bechatzrot Eloheinu yafriku od yenuvun beseva deshenim verananim yeyu lehagid ki ashar Adonai tzuri belavakavo.
Yeshua Koach. Mourner's Kaddish can be found on page 82. For those who are reciting, please rise and recite along. Yigadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehe shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam ulameh amaya. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shmei d'kodesha, rihu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'alma v'imru, amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Yeshua Kochachem to those who have been leading the service. We prepare for the Torah service at this time. We're in Parashat, but I'll say what I have to say, I'll say now, because that way it'll be the emptiest bima possible. So instead of waiting for the Torah to come out, I'll say we're entering Parashat Mishpatim. We're in the third of the Shlish of the triennial cycle. So we'll be starting on page 474 in the middle of chapter 23. We're used to starting earlier when we're actually getting the Mishpatim, and here we're getting a little bit of the end. A couple of notes, perhaps for your consideration as the Torah reading is going through. The first is we're going to get the famous statement of we will do and we will hearken. And although there are many interpretations of it, the interpretation I offer today is that you might notice that there was the 10 Commandments, and that was the covenant. And now there's a whole set of Mishpatim of ordinances, of laws that are now the revelation that we must keep. So presumably there is going to be more revelation and more laws to keep, and that happens to be true. So one interpretation following here in Mishpatim is that we will do and we will hear. It's not, maybe it's not the normal existential way we think of it as how profound it is to commit to doing something you haven't heard yet. But here they're saying, we will do what we have heard and we will hearken to what we have not yet heard. And so that it's an acknowledgement that revelation will continue and our obligations will continue. Richard Elliott Friedman, who is kind of a speculative Bible scholar, he's fun because he likes to take historical things and produce scholarly midrashim on them. I view them as, I don't think he'd appreciate that. I think he would say they're factual academic statements. But one of the things I enjoy is that he points out in Mishpatim toward the beginning, it starts off with not being able to imprison or not being able to enslave a fellow Israelite or a fellow Jew. And that comes up again in the Haftarah. And one of the things he points out is it's a little strange to keep using the word Hebrew. You may not have a Hebrew slave. You must free your Hebrew slaves, because at this point, we are now referred to as Israelites. We are no longer the Hebrews who were imprisoned in Egypt. And his view is that the very word Hebrew, our ancestral name Eved, is probably Hebrew in Ever or in Over, Ivri, that the root sure looks a lot like the root for servant or slave, Eved. As you know, when we're teaching people Hebrew, the hardest thing to get is the difference between a resh and a daled, because they look the same. And so therefore, this argument is that the very name for Hebrew, our ancestry, was associated because it was so much like. First two letters were shared, the third one was almost identical, that the very name Hebrew was associated with being a slave, and that is our history. And therefore, the language of the laws preserves the idea of not having a Hebrew slave to remind us of the both not grammatical, but the similar sounds and words that would have been associated. Their very essence is associated with our history and slavery. And finally, since we're reading the third Shlish, I can ask you that if you're enjoying reading in the English, following in the Hebrew, notice the parallels between the Akedah. And Richard, I won't say anything more about it if you're going to talk about the Akedah. Or no, okay. So as you're following along, you may just want to notice the parallels between 10 verbs being identical, places being repeated. So the pattern following the story of the command to bind and sacrifice Isaac, and then what actually happens, there are parallels throughout this part of the end of Mishpatim that seem to indicate the importance of covenant, promise, and the continuation of a faith that relies on a faith in the future. We continue with the Torah service now. Eileen, I will don my mouth kippah as we continue with page 139.
אין כמוך ואלוהים אדוני ואין כמעשיך מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור אדוני מלך אדוני מלך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. Abha etiva l'irtzota, etzivon, tineto, Yerushalayim.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai iti, v'nerom Hashem Oyavkav.
Shevet achim gam yachad, hine matov, hine matov, yada matov, yada da. We're down 2 lines from the bottom. Got it. Okay. We're on page 474 in the Eitz Chaim, down where it says Shishi. We're in Exodus chapter 23, verse 20, for those who are using other copies of the Tanakh. We call up our first Aliyah. V'yazor v'yagim v'yoshia l'chatzon v'avon amen. L'odeh Eloheinu l'kavod ha'Torah. Kohen karav ya'amo. Eliezer Elchanan ben Yaakov ha'kohen. Baruch she'atan Torah Moshe b'kedushato. V'yatem hadbekim b'Adonai Elohechem chayim. Ulechem hayom. Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natam lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten ha'Torah.
Amen. Amen. Hine anochi.
ואנוכי שולח מלאך לפניך לשמרך בדרך ולהביאך אל המקום אשר הכנותי והישמר לפניו ושמע בקולו התאמר בו כי לא יישא לפי שכם כי שמי בקרבו כי אם שמו תשמע בקולו ועשית כל אשר אדבר ואהבתי את אויביך וצרתי את צורריך כי ילך מלאכי לפניך והביאך אל המורי והחיתי והפריזי והכנעני והחיבי והיבוסי והחדתי לא תשתחווה לאלוהיהם ולא תעבדיהם ולא תעשה כמעשיהם כי הרס תהרסם ושבר תשבר מצבותיהם ועברתם את אדוני אלוהיכם ברך את לחמך ואת מימיך, ועשרתי מחלה
מקרבך.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayim natan b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshar koach. And our Rabat Levi. Ta'amod. Sarah bat Levi Abraham Halevi. Continuing with verse 26.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Leolam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן. לא תהיה משקלה ועקרה בארצך, את מספר ימיך אמלא, את אמותי ישלח לפניך, והחמותי את כל העם אשר תבוא בהם, ונתתי את כל אויביך אליך עורף, ושלחתי את הצרעה לפניך, וגרשה את החיבי, את הכנעני, את החיתי מלפניך, לא אגרשנו מפניך בשנה אחת, פן תהיה הארץ שממה ורבה עליך חיית השדה, מעט מעט אגרשנו מפניך, עד אשר תפרע ונחלתה את הארץ.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet b'chayei olam natan b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshar koach. As Mira comes and takes a spot from Larry, and Yeshar koach, Larry, beautiful. Our Shlishi. Ya'amod. Kadesh ben Avraham v'Sarah hashlishi. Shabbat shalom.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Borach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Leolam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
ושתי את גבולך מים סוף ועד ים פלישתים וממדבר עד הנהר, כי אתן בידכם את יושבי הארץ וגירשתמו מפניך, לא תכרות להם לאלוהיהם ברית, לא ישבו בארצך פן יכתהו אותך לי, כי תעבוד את אלוהיהם כי אליך למוקש.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshar koach. And our fourth. Ta'amod. Malka bat label v'fegi ha-revi'i. We continue with chapter 24.
Baruch Adonai Habarach.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Habarach Leolam Vaed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
משה אמר הלל אדוני, אתה ואהרון נדב ואביהו ושבעים מזקני ישראל, והשתחוויתם מרחוק. וניגש משה לבדו אל אדוני, והם לא ייגשו, והעם לא יעלו עמו. ויבוא משה ויספר לעם את כל דברי אדוני, ואת כל המשפטים, ויען כל העם, כל אחד ויאמרו, כל הדברים אשר דיבר אדוני נעשה. ויכתוב משה את כל דברי אדוני, וישכם בבוקר, ויבן מזבח תחת ההר, ב12 מצבה ל12 שבטי ישראל. וישלח את נערי בני ישראל, ויעלו עולות, ויזבחו זבחים שלמים לאדוני פרים. ויקח משה חצי הדם, וישם בהגנות, וחצי הדם זרק על המזבח.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם הגומל לחייבים טובים שגם לנו כל טוב.
מי שגמלך כל טוב, הוא יגמלך כל טוב. Selah. May God, who has been gracious to you, continue to favor you with all that is good. Amen. We continue with our fifth aliyah, our Hamishi. Ya'amod Chaim ben Shlomo, Hamishi.
Baruch Adonai Barak.
Baruch Adonai Barak le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Barak le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torah. Baruch Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
ויקח ספר הברית ויקרא באוזני העם ויאמרו כל אשר דיבר אדוני נעשה ונשמע. ויקח משה את הדם ויזרוק על העם ויאמר הנה דם הברית אשר כרת אדוני עמכם על כל הדברים האלה. ויעל משה ואהרון נדב ואביהו ו70 מזקני ישראל ויראו את אלוהי ישראל ותחת רגליו כמעשה לבנת הספיר וכעצם השמיים לטוהר. ואל אצילי בני ישראל לא ישלח ידו, לא שלח ידו, ויחזו את האלוהים ואכלו ויאכלו וישתו.
Sorry for the interruptions.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. We continue with Shishi, and I called that person up. Pastiche. We're at verse 12, page 479.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai Moshe alei elai hara v'yesham v'etna lecha ad luchot ha'even v'haTorah v'hamitzvah asher katavti lahorotam vayakam Moshe v'Yoshua misharato vayal Moshe el har Elohim ve'el hazakenim omar shuvu lanu vazeh ad asher nashuv aleichem v'hine Aaron v'achor imachem
מבעל דברים ייגש עליהם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yishar kochech. And our Shvi Aliyah. Ba'amod. My family had the great honor of knowing Pinchas, and he was an absolutely extraordinary human being and scholar. Sorry, I'm sorry. So we were at the beginning of the line. There you go.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayal Moshe el ha'ar vaychas ha'anan et ha'ar. Vayishkon kvod Adonai al har Sinai v'yachasei ha'anan sheshet yamim vayikra el Moshe vayom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan umar kvod Adonai keish uchelet barosh ha'ar le'nei bnei Yisrael vayavo Moshe mitoch ha'anan ve'al el ha'ar vayehi Moshe Ba'arba'im yom, ba'arba'im layla.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Misha berach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Vivarech virapeh tacholim michadena le'bat elamira ma'amichira shira bat chai alisheva ofiragudas dan Yitzchak ben Avraham v'Leah Yisrael Horsh ben Abraham Halevi v'Shangel Sprenza David ben Abaruch v'Vloria Yonah Moshe ben Shoshana v'Lib Yonatan Berfel v'Ladla Stacy Simpson Duke Hannah Hinda bat Moshe v'Brena Shlomi Yonah bat Abraham Asha Brucha Sam Silver Devorah bat Yehudi Gidol Henya bat Shandel Sprenza Shoshana bat Tovo Shlomo Hillel ben Herschel v'Shendela, Miriam Rupat Avram v'Sara, Alana Shatz, Rivka Lebat Avram Meir, Miriam ben Zion v'Esther, Aron ben Elisheva v'Mikael, Yudah Aron ben Elitzia v'Tzipora, Harav Shaga Yosef ben Rezel, Sen Devorah Aviva bat Yitzchak v'Esther, Avraham ben Dovid, Ashley Montgomery, Abraham ben Sher, Judith Elkin, Cornelius Barber, Benjamin Yisra ben Chanita, Dave Dubinsky, Tzvia Sarabat Aron ben Nechama, Eliezer Moshe ben Mirak, Sam Warner, Atticus Schoonover, Natalie Moshe Villea, Jen Cox, Sarah Rivka Bakuna, Shmuel Ben Yoel, Papa Yudis, Max Aaron, Azriel Shoshlomid, Shalom Zeb Ben Moshe, Drew McPherson, Kelly Popik, Yosef Ben Avram V'Sara, Avram Mikael Ben Chayalev Yitzchak Tzvihi, Florence Eisner Model, Shlomi Bat Sharon, Naomi Kaya Bat Shlomi, Sharon Bat Leah, Remy Hitchcock, Shoshana Bat Sar, Yitzchak Ben Yosef Paso, Esther Malka Bat Miriam, Avner Ben Yaakov V'Leah, Rachel Bat Avram V'Leah, David Ben Avracha, Kimberly Fuller, Esther Gittel Bat Esther Gittel Bat Chaya Rivka, Tito Flores, Karen Tolson, Sarah Esther Bat Moshe Avram V'Shoshana Rud, Feivel Yankel Ben Harry V'Bessi, David Ben Avrach V'Loria, Moshe Ben Chaya Leah, Elisheva Bat Sadiv Shmuel, Edward James Mills, Barbara Levin Bergman, Marla Biderman, Stacy Martin, Viet. וכל החולים בגילה קדושה, הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחזיקם רפאתם וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף בתוך שחלי ישראל, שבתי מלזכר רק אהבה לבוא, עכשיו יגלה בזמן קריב ונאמר אמן יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה ויעמד דברי קרתי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בגאווה ובזמן קריב ואמרו יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולם מעולם יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קודשם לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ביעלמה ואמרו Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vahed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Leolam Vahed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torto. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayal Moshe el hahar v'yichasenan et hahar v'yishkon kavod Adonai al har Sinai v'chasehu enan sheshet yamim v'yikra Moshe v'yom hashvi'i mitoch enan Mare kavod Adonai ke'ish ochelet b'rosh hahar le'nei b'nei Yisrael ויבוא משה בתוך ענן ויעל אל ההר ויהי משה בהר 40 יום ו40 לילה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat anat v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. שכוחך יעמדו הגבהה והגלילה ולגלילה. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני וימשה עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה בתום מאושר עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה בתום מאושר תברכיה היום בכל נתיבותיך שלום דרכיהם בכל נתיבותיך שלום And we are seated. As we are seated, we turn to page 482 for the Haftarah. The introduction is on the page before, and it's interesting. I commend it to you. And chapter 34 of Jeremiah, we've already been commanded to release Israelite slaves during the proper 6-year period. Yet it seems to be necessary for the king, Tzidkiyahu, to create a covenant in order for that to happen, which is then not obeyed. It plays out in the words that will be chanted by Lisa Bernstein.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbi'im tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hane'emarim b'emet. Baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'Torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo u'b'nbi'ei ha'emet b'tzedek. hadavar asher haya el Yirmiyahu me'et Adonai acharei kerod hamelech Tzidkiyahu berid et kol ha'am asher b'Yerushalayim likra lahem deror l'shalach ish et avdo ve'ish et shifchato ha'ivri v'ha'ivriya chofshim levilti avad bam v'yehudi achihu ish v'yishme'u kol hasarim v'chol ha'am asher ba'u v'abrit l'shalach ish et avdo ve'ish et shifchato chofshim v'vilti avad bam od v'yishme'u v'yishalechu v'yashuvu acharechen v'yashivu et ha'avadim v'et hashpachot asher shilchu chofshim v'yichbeshum la'avadim v'lishpachot v'yihid bar Adonai el Yirmiyahu ve'et Adonai lemor K'amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael Anochi karati berit et avotechem v'yom hotzeiti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim מבית עבדים לאמור מקץ 7 שנים תשלחו איש את אחיו העברי אשר ימכר לך ועבדך 6 שנים ושילחתו חופשי מעמך ולא שמעו אבותיכם אליי ולא הטו את אוזנם ותשובו אתם היום ותעשו את הישר בעיניי לקרוא דרור איש לרעהו ותפרטו ברית לפניי בבית אשר נקרא שמי עליו ותשובו ותהללו את שמי ותשיבו איש את עבדו ואיש את שפחתו אשר שילחתם חופשים לנפשם ותכבשו אותם להיות לכם לעבדים ולשפחות לכן כה אמר אדוני אתם לא שמעתם אליי לקרוא דרור איש לאחיו ואיש לרעהו הנני קורא לכם דרור נאום אדוני אל החרב אל הדבר ואל הרעב ונתתי אתכם לזעבה לכל ממלכות הארץ ונתתי את האנשים העוברים את הברית אשר לא הקימו את דברי הברית אשר כרתו לפניי העגל אשר כרתו לשניים ויעברו בין בתריו שרי יהודה ושרי ירושלים הסריסים והכהנים וכל עם הארץ העוברים בין בתרי העגל ונתתי אותם ביד אויביהם וביד מבקשי נפשם והייתה נבלתם למאכל לעוף השמיים ולבהמת הארץ. וצדקיהו מלך יהודה וצריו אתן ביד אויביהם וביד מבקשי נפשם וביד חיל מלך בבל העולים מעליכם. הנני מצווה נאום אדוני בהשיבותים אל העיר הזאת ונלחמו עליה ולכדוה ושרפוה באש ואת ערי יהודה אתן שממה מעין יושב. כה אמר אדוני אם לא בריתי יומם ולילה חוקות שמיים וארץ לא שמתי. גם זרע יעקב ודוד עבדי אמאס מקחת מזרעו מושלים אל זרע אברהם יצחק ויעקב כי אשיב את שבותם וריחמתים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם צור כל העולמים צדיק בכל הדורות האל הנאמן האומר ועושה המדבר ומקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ונאמנים דבריך ודבר אחד מדבריך אחור לא ישוב ריקם כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי היא בית חיינו ולעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו על כיסא לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
We continue on page 148 with Yakum Korkan.
יקום פורקן מן שמיים.
Yakum Korkan min shamayim.
וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם עם כל ישראל אחיהם ונאמר amen.
We continue with the blessing Mevarachim HaChodesh for the new month. I'm going to invite up Diane at this time and our Torah carrier or holder. We're on page 150, and we are treated to Adars this year. So Adar Rishon is coming up. Please rise.
I'll just add a little extra word with that. It's been, a long winter and it's not quite over, but we have 2 Adars to be happy and see the growth of reasons to smile. So. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu, shetchadesh aleinu et chachodesh hazeh letova v'livracha, v'titen lanu chayim arukim, chayim shel shalom, chayim shel tova, chayim shel bracha, chayim shel parnasa, Hayim shel hilut zatzamot, Hayim she'esh bachem yirat shamayim v'yirat hed, Hayim she'en bachem usha uchlima, Hayim shel osher v'chavod, Hayim she'tehevanu havat Torah v'yirat shamayim, Hayim she'imalu mishalot libenu l'tova, Amen. Selah. Misha asanisim lavotenu, v'ga'al otamei avdut lecherut, v'yigal otanu b'karov, v'kabetz nidchenu, me'arba kanfot haaretz, haverim kol Yisrael, v'nomar Amen. Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon, Yeh b'yom Shlishi u'v'yom Revi'i, Haba Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael l'tova.
Amen.
Yichadshehu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Aleinu v'al Kol Amo Beit Yisrael. L'chaim u'shalom.
Amen.
L'sason u'simcha.
Amen.
Yeshua u'nechama. V'nomar
Amen. May the Holy One bless this new month for us and all God's people, the house of Israel, with life and peace, joy, gladness, deliverance, and consolation. And let us say, Amen. We may be seated as we continue with Ashrei, page 151.
Ashrei Ashrei Beitecha Od Yalucha Selah, Ashrei Am Shekacha Lo, Ashrei Am Shadonai Eloha, Tila LeDavid, Aromimcha Lo HaMelech, V'avarcha Shimcha Leolam Va'ed, B'chol Yom Avarchecha, V'alala Shimcha Leolam Va'ed, Gadol Adonai Hula Me'od, V'ligdulatcho Ein Cheker, Dor LeDor Yishabach Masecha, U'gvuratecha Yagi. Hadar kavod hodecha, v'divrei niflotecha asicha, lezuz noratecha yomeru, ugdulatcha saprena, zecher avtucha yabiu, v'tzidkacha yiranenu, chanu barachum Adonai, yarachapayim ugdal chesed, tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav, yoduch Adonai kol ma'asecha, chasidecha yivarchucha, kevod malchutecha yomeru, Ugvuratcha yitaberu, Lodia livnei hadam gvurotav, Uchvod hadar malchutav, Malchutecha malchut kol olamim, Umemshaltecha bechol dor vador, Somech Adonai lechol hanoflim, Zokef lechol hakafufim. Einei chol elecha yisaberu, V'ata noten lahem et achlam beito, Poteach et yadecha, Masbia lechol chai ratzon, Tzadik Adonai bechol derachav, V'chasid bechol ma'asav, Karov Adonai lechol karav, Lechol asher yikra'uhu be'emet, Ratzon yireyav ya'aseh, Ve'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiyim, Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav, V'et kol rishayim yashmid, Tehilat Adonai yidaber pi, Vayivarech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed, Va'anachnu nevarech Yah, Ve'achav Yadoam. Hallelujah.
The curtain is opened, we rise.
Yeah, hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Yinizkav Shemo Levado, Odo, Yeshua, Hayah, Tila, Chasida, B'nai Yisrael, Hallelujah, He's more like Davi.
We remain standing for the prayer for our country. Page 148. Creator of all flesh, bless all the inhabitants of our country with your spirit. And may citizens of all races and creeds forge a common bond of true harmony, to banish hatred and bigotry, to safeguard the ideals of free institutions for our pride and glory of our country. In this land, your Father, in this voice, and all people, nation shall not Amen. Perfect.
We want them to come up to Thanks so much. Sorry for that.
Amen.
May we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world.
The nation will not threaten nation. Mankind will not again know war.
For all who live on earth shall realize, we have not come into being to hate or to destroy. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love.
Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion.
Fulfill this promise conveyed in Scripture. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you.
I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war.
Let love and justice flow like a mighty stream. Let peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. We may be seated. We invite up Richard Primus for words of Torah today.
Shabbat shalom. One preliminary matter. Each winter, when it gets cold, I have a period of struggle with a respiratory condition that behaves kind of like asthma, though I'm told it isn't actually asthma. What this means is when I speak for several minutes, or if I sing or have been singing, sometimes my breath will catch and I will cough hard. I'm mentioning that because I've been singing, and I'm about to be speaking. And so it's likely that's going to happen in the next few minutes. And if it happens, I want you to know that I am recently tested and COVID negative, right? And that it will be fine within about 10 or 12 seconds. Okay. Now the parsha. There are two big problems, or at least big questions, that leap off the page, right on the surface in Parashat Mishpatim. And there are two different kinds, and one is early in the parasha and one is late. The first one is, we just got done with the revelation of the 10 Commandments at Sinai, right? That's how Yitro ends last week. And that it's big, right? It's theological, it's moral in deep and large ways, right? And then, okay, what's next, right? What's next week? And we turn the page, we come in the next week, and we start getting all these little picky rules, right? What happened, right? We were like at this big crescendo and we lost it. And now we've got all these other like little things, one after another, no particular clear moral scheme or theological. I mean, we're very good at mining those things for moral or theological significance, but something has happened, right? Like what happened? That's problem one. And Jewish tradition recognizes this problem and faces it squarely and offers various ideas about it, right? The second problem happens at the end, and Jewish tradition does not face the problem squarely and tries to make it go away. The problem at the end is that God calls Moses and the elders of Israel up to God's presence, and they see God, right? The text strongly indicates physically, right? I'm reading right from the text. Vayir'u et Elohei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Israel. right? This can't be, right? It is like if there is a first principle of Jewish cosmology, it is that, at least as we know it, is that God has no physical form, right? God cannot be seen. And because this is a big problem, right, the tradition has done what it often does. It tries to make it go away, right? It doesn't really mean they saw God. If you read the commentary in the Eitz Chaim, right, you'll see an example, right? Totally central casting kind of example, where it says that, but that's not what it means, right? It means they perceived God in a particularly acute way. But that's not what it says. And in fact, the rest of the pasuk is a very weird rest of the pasuk if it doesn't actually mean that they saw God in a visual, physical way, because we get a physical description, right? V'tachat raglav, livnat hasapir, and under his feet was this pavement of sap. This sounds like the relation of a concrete visual. They saw God, right? And a fair amount of rabbinic ingenuity over the years has been devoted to making it go away. They did not see God, or to pretending it isn't there, right? Because it's a pretty big problem. Each of these two problems can be answered on its own terms, I think, pretty adequately by taking a step back and regarding the Torah as a pastiche of texts rather than a unified one, right? That is to say, to the first problem, we say the Torah is a text written in multiple genres, right? Some of those genres are more poetry-like and some are more prose-like. Some are about the great big things and some are about the smaller things and some of them are narratives and some, right? So we got two different things and they're stapled together like that happens, it's normal, right? And the second one, sort of similarly, can be addressed by saying that the Torah isn't a document written all at once, having in mind all of the things that we would come to know as the fundamental principles of Judaism. That's a text accreted over the course of many generations, and that is a matter of the history of Jewish thought. The idea that God can have no visible form is a relatively late entrant, right? Late relative to the Torah text as we know it, right, into Jewish orthodoxy, small o. And each of those ideas, each of those answers, right, resolves the problem, and each answer is a good answer on its own terms, right? But giving these answers comes at a cost, right? It comes at the cost of our ability to tell a unified story about Parashat Mishpatim, right? So what I want to do with the next couple of minutes is try to offer such a unified story in a way that makes sense of these two problems, right? And the story goes like this. Parashat Mishpatim is the story of God's slow recovery from having been rejected by the Israelites at Sinai. That's the story, as I want to tell it, to make sense of these problems, right? Here's what I mean. Sinai is supposed to be God's big moment, right? It's revelation. God's been doing all these miracles in Egypt, at the sea, right? In the desert. God has mostly been communicating through Moses, right? And Sinai is the big moment when God is finally going to meet the people squarely, right? And they're going to establish the direct relationship. And so we get the build up to Sinai and we get the revelation. And God begins to speak to the people, right? Through the Dibrot. And the people freak out, right? They can't handle it, right? Right away, they tell Moshe, make it stop. Right? Make it stop. We can't listen to this. We have to go away, right? And the people leave the mountain, and God gives the other commandments just to Moses, not to the people, right? Various traditions tell us. And the people have to stand at a distance, right? And if God's going to say more, it's got to be just to Moses. And God feels rejected, right? God tried to establish a direct relationship with the people, and the people didn't want it. And that, it's theologically challenging to say something like, and that hurts, right? But I kind of want to say, either it hurts or in some other way, God diagnoses a problem, right? right? This relationship of leadership and peoplehood is not going to go down right now quite the way God envisioned when God decided to speak directly to the people. And there has to be some adjustment. So in Parashat Mishpatim, God tries out a couple of strategies of adjustment for a different relationship with people, right? A different strategy of leadership. The first one goes like this. God thinks, the problem was I went too big, right? I went too big. So I got to go small. And we get the beginning of Parashat Mishpatim, right? Instead of these like very large, ambitious, totalizing, deep injunctions and principles, that's what the people freaked out about. We get a bunch of little things, right? God thinks maybe I can bring them in that way. Maybe that's the level at which I can conduct this relationship. But it's still not quite working. And so God says, okay, second strategy. The problem is me. Right? The problem is, actually, God being infallible would say the problem is I. The problem is me. The problem is that who I really am is not someone who the people can handle and relate to. I have to change, or at least I have to appear to change. I have to present myself to the people as something that I'm not quite, but that's more relatable to them. And that might be something with a physical form. Maybe something with a physical form is more relatable to the people than some abstract, unseen, invisible force. So I'm going to conjure a physical image of myself and let the people see it. I think there is a textual clue to this story that I think of as the third problem of Parshat Mishpatim, although I'm presenting it here as a solution. But it's not much noticed. And it's this. The leader in God's position, as I'm telling the story, the one who had the big moment and it didn't work and then struggles with the question of how to perform leadership from that point and tries out various different strategies, is suffering a problem of voice. Right? It's like, I don't know what my voice should be. I'm going to try speaking small instead of big. I'm going to try speaking in a voice that's not quite my own. Right? God is struggling to find a different voice. And the textual clue to this is something that's missing from Parshat Mishpatim, which is what I think of as the most common typical sentence in the Torah, right? Vayomer, or Vayedaber, Adonai El. In the book of Exodus, it would be Moshe, Lemor. Search Mishpatim high and low for this sentence and you will not find it. It's not there. Right? The parsha, it would be normal for a parsha to begin, Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. 1, 2. Ele HaMishpatim. These are the laws. No, but that's not how Mishpatim starts. Mishpatim just starts with Ele HaMishpatim, right? Because God's normal voice is lost. God does not feel comfortable speaking in God's own normal voice. And so he's saying that aside. After God tries the first strategy, we know that God thinks it's not quite working, because in the transition to the second strategy, when God says to Moses, come up with the elders and see me, we get this very strange sentence about what God says. It's the beginning of chapter 24, making that transition. It says, in a place where we would expect to see Vayedaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor, it just says, Ve'el Moshe Amar. And to Moses he said, who said? Where else in the Torah do we get Ve'el someone Amar? And that introduces the statement of God. The Torah introduces God speaking by saying Vayedaber or Vayomer Adonai El, name of person, Lemor. God does not have God's voice back yet. It's tentative. It's halting. It's still experimenting with new different things, and it's not a full voice of that character. Only after the people come up and see God, only after the episode with Vayiru with Elohei Israel, do we get Vayomer Adonai El Moshe, which is as close as we're going to come in this parasha to Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Lemor, right? It's almost back, right? God feels after that second strategy that, okay, I got something. I got most of it back. That was enough. It's relatable. We can go forward from here. I want to suggest that the first of these two strategies, I went big and I went too big, and so now I have to go small. It has pluses and minuses, right? And it's a discretionary judgment call of leadership, successful and less successful, about when to make it, right? Second strategy is a big problem. The second strategy, though it feels to God in the moment like it's mostly back because we at least get Vayomer Adonai, the second strategy is a big problem. Because if you change who you are, or you change how you appear, you set in motion things that are going to be destructive to the leadership that you're trying to enact. Because it's not really you anymore, right? You're pretending, you're faking. And we know that the Torah tells us this is a big problem. Why? Because what happens next in the story? Next, Moses goes up the mountain. We get a break, right, to Teruma, Tetzaveh, with all kinds of like little details about what Moses is learning on the mountain, about the Mishpatim. But when we return to the narrative, the next thing that happens is Chet HaEgel. The next thing that happens is the golden calf. And God is really, really angry about the golden calf. And why is God so angry about the golden calf? I want to suggest that God is angry because God looks at the calf and says, what's the sin? The sin is the people have made a physical artifact to lay eyes upon, to think of as the God of Israel. You know what makes us angriest in the various mistakes that our children make? It's when we recognize that there are mistakes repeated, right? They say, you see something and you think that's not right, and then you think, oh, I did that. I taught that lesson and it's being played out. And it shouldn't make you mad or at your kid, but it should make you mad or at yourself. And sometimes you express, and you feel anger and frustration, and God feels it. Because God looks at the ego and says, I did that. I made a physical form trying to get something done, and they made a physical form. Leadership is tough. And it often requires adjustment when things don't go the way you thought they were going to, or planned, or hoped for, right? If your community, whatever community is you're trying to lead, isn't ready for something really, really big, sometimes you have to think about going smaller, right? And going smaller, it doesn't always mean going trivial, right? There's stuff in what I'm describing as smaller that's kind of important, right? It's not as big as that other thing. Sometimes you have to make that decision, right? Sometimes, if you can't spend an enormous amount of money to cure most of society's ills and save the planet, maybe you can spend a still considerable amount of money at least to save the planet without doing everything else. Sometimes you have to go smaller. But don't respond by changing who you are, right? That's the second strategy. If you make that mistake, you will regret it later. That, at any rate, is the story that I offer to solve these two problems about Parshat Mishpatim. Shabbat Shalom.
Please rise, page 155 for Musa.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash shnei rabbav v'yamad divrach yirteh v'yamlich malchuteh b'chayei chon v'yom echon u'b'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael v'gala v'zman karib v'yimeru amen Yehei shmei rabba mevorach v'olam li'omei almaya Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpar, v'yitmama, v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar, v'yithalev, v'yithalal, shemei dekudesha, v'yichu le'elam, mikol bechata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, gamiran b'yamar, v'yimeru. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibur v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chazdei Avod Umevi Goel Livnei B'nehem L'man Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer U'Pokedu Moshiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Upoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Etim Atah Rab Lehoshia, Mashib HaRuach, Umarid HaGashem, Mechachel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayim Etim Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Verafei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umakayim Emunato Lishenei Afar Michamo Chabal Gevurot Umidom Elach Melech Meimit Umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Atah L'Hachayot Beitim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim Naritzecha v'nakdishecha Kisot siach sarfei kodesh Hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh Kakatu al yad neviyecha V'kora zel zeviyam Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Meloko haaretz kevodo. Kevodo male male olam ayemekom kevodo. Kevodo male male olam ayemekom kevodo. Kevodo male male olam. Mishar tav shoalim shoalim zelazeh ayemekom kevodo. Mishar tav shoalim shoalim zelazeh ayemekom kevodo. Leumatam baruch yomeru kavod Adonai mimkomo. Mimkomo hu yifen berachamim v'yachon am ham yacharim shemo erev avoker bechol yom tamid hamayim be'ahava shema omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu Vehu Yashmienu Berachamav Shenid le'enei kochai liod lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem u'divrei kadshecha lechatu lemor imloch Adonai le'olam Elohayich Tzion ledor vador hallelujah ledor vador nagid gadlecha u'lenitzach nitzachim kedushatcha nakdish v'shifavcha Eloheinu mipinu le'yomushir le'olam va'ed Ki el melech gadol v'kadosh atah baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
For those still davening, please continue as we're on 181.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabba, Yalma divrach yirteh, v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayechon v'yamechon, v'chayedechol beit Yisrael, b'agolav izman kariv, v'yimeru, Yehei Shmei Rabba mevorach, v'olam yomei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh, v'yitalal Shmei Dekudesha, v'elam min kol berchata v'shirata, tishbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran v'yama v'yimeru, Kitgabal Salatahona, Utahonda, Chol Yisrael, Kadamu Bahonda, Bishimaya Vimaru, Yehesh Lamaraba Min Shamaya Vechayim, Alenu Vial Chol Yisrael Vimaru, Ose Shalom Bimramav, Huya Asa Shalom, Alenu Vial Chol Yisrael Vimaru.
182.
En Eloheinu, en Eloheinu, en Kamokeinu, en Kamoshienu, Mikalohenu, Mikalohenu, Mikamokeinu, Mikamoshienu, Adol Eloheinu, Nodol Eloheinu, Nodol Eloheinu,
Please rise.
Hallelujah.
Reshit Shelo Asanu Kigoya Haratzot Velo Samanu Kimishbachot Hadama Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem Vigor Alenu Kiko Hamonam Va'anachnu Korim Umishtachavim Umodim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Noteh Shamayim V'Yoset Aretz Umoshev Yikaro B'Shamayim Mima'al Ushchinatu Zo B'Gavei Meromim Hu Eloheinu Ein Od Emet Malkeinu Efesulato Kakatu b'Torato v'yadata hayom v'hashevota elevavecha ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim b'shamayim mimal v'al haaretz mitachat ein od. Kakatu b'Toratecha Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'chaya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz v'yom hahu Bayom hachu yiyeh Adonai echad. Ushemo, Ushemo, Ushemo echad.
Mourner's Cottage can be found on page 184. This week marks the first year Yortzeit, the first Yortzeit, for Brad Axelrod's father, Leslie Robert Axelrod, for Deborah Ball's cousin, Andrew Diamond, for Eleanor Fallett's brother, Michael Zeller. We also remember the Yortzeits of Edward Chudikoff, Ann Corin, Audrey Elkes, Rose Fair, Ed Field, Elsa Gons, Max Glazier, David Goldberg, Minnie Gordon, Max Gordon, Edward Green, Betty Greenberg, Louis Jacob Harris, Dora Horowitz, Kenneth Paul Jones, Bernard Kelman, Morris Kishlansky, Aaron Kirpich, Arnold Lada, Ann Lakin, Ida Leibovitz, Walter Levine, Buena Lichter, Harry Mankoff, Sylvia Markel, Hannah Meyerstein, Arthur Miller, Sherry Mullen, Isaac Nagler, Katan Penchasov, Willie Schlesinger, Elsbeth Schlesinger, Helene Schwartz, Harry Serwin, Norma Schifrin, Rabbi Jacob Stoll, Ephraim Spivak, Gertrude Tankanow, Edna Weil, Armin Zalean, and Gussie Lassman Zand. As we continue to say Kaddish for Zelig Cutler, Victor Rosenberg, Doris Doctor, Lorraine Nadelman, Nelson Stewart Schaefer, Avram Shore, Mark Lieberman, Ruth Neiman Gray, Elaine Stoller, Natalie Scher, Philip Brader, Susan Feingold Schultz, Judith Cashton, Lorraine Sherman, Michael Adams, Leona Leon, Phyllis Werbel, Fanchen Lessing, Carol Feinerman. And our condolences to Barbara Stark Neiman on the death of David Fallman, her cousin. We remember him as well. Mourner's Kaddish, page 184 for those reciting. Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah v'Yalma Divra Kirute v'Yamlich Malchute v'Chayechon v'Yomechon v'Chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael v'Agala v'Zman Kari v'Imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Olamei Omayel Yiparach v'Yishtabach v'Yipa'ar v'Yitramam v'Yitnaseh V'yitadar v'yitala v'yitalal shmei dekudisha le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'ama v'imru Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. May their memories continue to bring blessings to this world, as I know they do. I'm going to share some announcements at this time. I want to remind everyone that the Federation event will be taking place on Wednesday, February 9th at 5 p.m. And please visit the Federation website to register. And of course, for the main event, we're having Dara Horn present. I gave a sermon about her several weeks ago, but looking forward to getting it directly from her perspective. There's been a lot of controversy about her book, which is not surprising. I did not raise controversy in the sermon, but interesting. It's also interesting how she has commented on her book since the controversy, basically a controversy about whether we as Jews today focus on anti-Semitism on other things, and the interesting dynamics that play out intergenerationally therein, whether those of us who are older don't want the younger generation to focus on anti-Semitism, and whether we're taking away their voice in that value. Interesting discussion. What a great choice. We look forward to it. I want to also mention that tomorrow we have an extraordinary event here in keeping with our mission. So, Tikkun Olam in Washtenaw County, the Michigan Center for Youth Justice. By 4 p.m. here in the building and also hybrid on Zoom, Beth Israel Congregation Social Action Committee is pleased to offer congregation and its friends an opportunity to learn about the Michigan Center for Youth Justice at 4 p.m. Our speaker will be MCYJ's outreach coordinator, Hussein Hadri, familiar to the Social Action Committee from his presentation at the October meeting, really on the issues of how financial penalties and charges are used to unfairly and cruelly saddle those who don't have the means to pay and to leverage the justice system against them, very much in keeping with the themes of Mishpatim. As Richard so well said, that maybe the smaller things, but when you think about them, really not so small at all. I also want to mention at this time, which is why I did the announcements myself, is that I don't know if Amanda Glokolich is here right now. I suspect that she is freezing cold in Burns Park at the, what is it called again? Not the Tot Shabbat, the bite-sized Shabbat that we've been doing every week in coordination with Ann Arbor Orthodox Minyan, HDS, and others. And so here she is serving our congregation. This is her last Shabbat here with the congregation, at least as part of her tenure as being on staff. As you may have seen the announcement that went out, Amanda is turning to the next chapter in her life. She's been someone who's been not afraid to journey forward in her life and to accept new opportunities and challenges. And I want to acknowledge, though, as much as I want to express to her our understanding and compassion about, imagine if I told you that you were going to be the engagement director and the program director of a congregation that months after you arrive at, with the next 2 years would be under COVID restrictions. And Amanda really has been on the front lines of our form of Levite service to the community. We know we have a lot of sympathy and understanding from the congregation, but that doesn't change the day-to-day where someone says, I can't believe you're not doing that in person. I'm personally offended as a Jew and as a human being. And you're like, fine, we'll do it in person. Other people, I can't believe you're going to do that in person, right? I can't believe you're going to do it hybrid. I don't understand why. What we need is more Zoom programming. And other people saying, I'm on Zoom all day for work. The last thing I can do tonight is get on a lecture or a discussion. There's no way to win. There's absolutely been no way to win. And for someone who came in with the mission, as all of us have, of touching lives and touching hearts, I mean, I think that's our main mission, is something we can do. And it's been very, very challenging to do that. Or if when you do make calls and you connect with people, it's hard over and over again to experience the compassion fatigue, which is for many of us, as Diane said so well, we have, thank God we have 2 Adars to try to find hope in, because a lot of listening is listening to pain. And I shouldn't say it, but some hopelessness. I mean, some despair, let's put it that way. So I want to acknowledge that Amanda's had a tremendously challenging time coming in for a role that has really been virtually impossible. I guess I should say virtually impossible to do. She's done everything she can. She's done, delivering cupcakes with masks on at a distance to people on their birthdays, to pack bags for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, with personal touches therein, to try to have programming by Zoom and by otherwise, and to try to, and to sit there, to go out every Saturday to Burns Park, and to make programming for kids so that they can experience Shabbat together in a place that's healthy. And so while there's no way around the second and third guessing that goes on for every step we take as a community, often with her in the position of trying to make the suggestion, it's thankless, but we thank her. When we understand what it must have been like, we are grateful for every success that she's had. We're grateful for every touch that she's done. We're grateful for every cupcake, every smile, every call, every question where she's saying, what would this feel like for you? Every time she's gotten on Zoom with a smile on her face and led and had an event to teach us about South Africa and heritage, or to raise our consciousness with the social action program. She'll be here tomorrow, of course, because that's a program that she's staff running. And so our sincere, really deep gratitude to what Amanda took on in serving the Jewish community and serving us. We are grateful. We feel truly served and touched. We're grateful that she has spent such a significant chunk of her life here in Ann Arbor trying to touch our lives. With that, I ask us to turn to, and if you get a chance to see her and thank her before she takes off this week, please do so. Adon Olam, page 187.
Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Liet nasa lechefzo kol. Azai melech shemo nikra adon olam. V'acharei kiklot hakol. Levado yimloch nara adon olam. V'hu haya v'hu hoveh. V'hu yeh b'tifara adon olam. V'hu echad v'ein sheni. V'ham shila v'habira ve'od olam. Bili Reshit, Bili Tachlit, Below Ha'oz V'ham Yisra Adon Olam, V'hu Eli, V'chai Goali, V'tzur Chavli B'yetzara Adon Olam, V'hu Nisi Umanosli, Menakasi B'yom Ekra Adon Olam, B'yado Avki Ruchi, B'yetishan B'yaira Adon Olam, V'yimruchi Geviati Adonai li Elohira Adon Olam. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.